You're in the hands of an adolescent.
It's mystery. I don't like mysteries. Your bellyache. I gotta kill you right now.
Aye, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core podcast. I am UrzaMaster. Joining me as always, Lord Uther, and today our recurring guest host, DEA agent John Hatcher. Welcome, fellas. Welcome.
Welcome.
The Final Frontier continues today with two of the finer entries in the first season of the original series, Star Trek. The groundbreaking sci-fi series which hit the screens, the small screens, back in the mid to late 60s. And, you know, you may ask, why here on Pending Rebrand at YouTube, subscribe and like and drop us a comment and tell us what you think, would we be going over 50-year-old television, almost 60-year-old television? Well, the original series, as we've talked many times in the last few episodes, doesn't just set the grounds for future Star Trek. It really redefined science fiction in a big way and influenced basically everything you see on TV today, including non-science fiction shows. Not only do you get your Big Bang theories out of this, but you get many, many other successful, sometimes even dramas on TV that harken back to episodes specifically like the ones we may be talking about today. And as a matter of fact, I feel like a few shows have echoed these exact storylines in a few different manners, and you'll probably pick it up as we talk about them. But to get us in today, as always, I turn it over to our resident expert slash recurring guest host slash permanent guest recurring host, DEA agent John Hatcher.
Thank you, UrzaMaster. Thank you, Lord Uther. And thanks to you, both in this galaxy and the next, from right here in the US of A and across the pond, wherever you may be watching or listening. We will begin with episode 8 of season 1 of the original series, Miri, first aired on October 27th, 1966. The director was Vincent McKeevity, who had both a distinguished career in television, directing episodes of The Untouchables, Gunsmoke, Magnum P.I., Angela Lansbury in Murder, She Wrote, and Dick Van Dyke in Diagnosis Murder. But he also did several feature films for Walt Disney Productions when Walt Disney Productions was making crazy live-action movies. And by crazy, I mean such titles as The $1 Million Duck, The Apple Dumpling Gang Rides Again, 2 Love Bug sequels, Herbie Goes to Monte Carlo and Herbie Goes Bananas. So,
Great one.
Those are just a few of Mr. McKeevity's credits. And in a rare twist, he actually directed the following episode we're going to be talking about shortly, Dagger of the Mind. So it's 2 for McKeevity. Ernie Banks would be proud. Let's play 2 with him behind the cameras. So the Miri was written by Adrian Spies, great name. And not only did he contribute to Wagon Train, Hawaii Five-0, Marcus Welby, MD, T.J. Hooker, with none other than our captain, Bill Shatner, but he was recruited, it appears, from the Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse. Now, don't forget, Desilu is the production company, Lucille Ball, that helped launch and keep afloat Star Trek during its initial television run. So what we have here again with Adrian is not somebody who was a science fiction aficionado, not a sci-fi novelist or short story writer, but somebody who came from the television side, from Desilu, recruited to work on this episode. So again, a variety of voices and backgrounds and experiences help color these early episodes and indeed this entire first season of Star Trek. We'll see as we move further along that there'll be more defined roles, more recurring writers, producers, etc. But right now, it's just like a delicious salad bar of content and different shadings that we get, which sometimes means they can vary from episode to episode. Now, Miri aired in '66. In the 1970s and 1980s, this particular episode, along with 3 others, was banned by the BBC. If you're keeping score at home, Pluto's Stepchildren, The Empath, and Whom Gods Destroy were also banned by the BBC. The BBC. They cited that there was madness, torture, sadism, and disease on display, and therefore inappropriate for young viewers. So now we sit back on our comfortable perch, 2023, having come from our own mysterious plague, global pandemic ourselves, and we kind of look with some bemusement at how it is portrayed, in the mid to late '60s. But at the time, apparently, it caused quite a kerfuffle. So as a result, if you were growing up across the pond in the United Kingdom, you would not have been able to see Miri until, I believe, they released the hold in the early 2000s. So finally, at long last, the content was unlocked. The exteriors, and you will note that this episode feels much, much different from the previous ones that we've seen so far in the cycle. There have been exterior shots in the man trap and where no man has gone before, et cetera, but they've all been of the clearly a soundstage with faux rocks and valleys and so forth. The original volume, as Lucasfilm likes to use in their Star Wars productions. But this one, while still being on an obvious backlot, it's the first sort of real environment that they've been in, aside from the bridge and the transporter room and the dispensary. These are, it looks like the backlot of, Universal Studios or Sony. And it's a little jarring and it's a little exciting to kind of see them out in actual sunlight and knowing, that this is, and of course they'll revisit, real world locations, standing in for alien worlds, strange new worlds, as we go further along. But it is, at first, it's kind of exciting to see them on there. Those exteriors, by the way, were actually used for another Desilu production, the Andy Griffith Show. Although I think Andy would have been very upset at the sheer amount of waste and debris that was lying around on this planet. But yes. So
why is everything so dirty?
They repurposed the sets of the Andy Griffith Show for that. Now, as for those mischievous scamps running around trying to raise themselves, we had amongst them some noted names. Kim Darby, who plays the young girl who falls for Captain Kirk, falls for him hard. She was the original Maddie in True Grit with John Wayne from 1969. Haley Steinfeld, of course, did an amazing job in the Coen brothers remake of that picture from 2010, but it was Kim Darby who originally hired Rooster Cogburn to help bring justice. And that picture was a few years after this episode, so this episode clearly launched her into a different atmosphere. Michael J. Pollard plays John, and that's a character actor that we all know from Bonnie and Clyde as C.W. Moss, but you may have also caught him in some of his later eccentric cameos and supporting roles. He played homeless character in Scrooged. He played the weapons designer, the James Bond Q-like character for Sylvester Stallone and Kurt Russell in Tango and Cash. And he also made an appearance in Warren Beatty's Dick Tracy. And these were all, and he,
That's right.
yes, Michael J. Pollard. He did not have conventional good looks for a leading man, so of course they sort of typecast him in these eccentric, oddball type roles. But here he gets to show a little young, menacing presence, a little bit of the actor's studio kind of.
Hey, anytime I can hear Tango and Cash on a podcast, I'm
Yes.
clicking subscribe, I'm clicking like, and I'm sharing that out to everybody because Tango and Cash, first of all, doesn't get mentioned enough in podcasts, and second of all, doesn't get the love that it truly deserves. Because I remember watching that movie at the Campbell homestead and just being wowed by the incredible performances of one Mr. Stallone and one Mr. Russell in that film. I mean,
One of
And
the
even years
finest
later,
pairings.
yeah,
and even years later, I mean, the incisive, cogent commentary about society that that film brings up, really, truly, it is cross generations and really should be embraced by all. In fact, there should be a national holiday where we all watch Tango and Cash.
Tango and Cash.
and
Some,
that's
You
it.
heard it here first.
It's
sometimes
been
many.
decided we are gonna do a live stream of Tango and Cash and just comment through the entire thing. We'll make sure we get those dates out to our millions
And millions.
And millions.
of wow, that's 3 of pending rebrand fans. So sorry about that there, Mr. Hatcher. I'll
No,
let you
not at all.
continue.
Not at all. And in fact, Terry Hatcher has a supporting role in Tango and Cash as Sylvester Stallone's younger sister that Kurt Russell would very much like to get to know better.
Take out to the movies.
Yes.
The kids, the other kids that are causing such mischief and shenanigans, also included some of the actors and production crew's children. William Shatner's daughters, Lisbeth and Melanie, make appearances. Grace Lee Whitney's son pops in there. The director, Vincent McKeevity, he managed to get his boy on there. Didn't get him a SAG card, but he got him on camera. And Gene Roddenberry's daughters, Darlene and Dawn. So that's how the gang was formed. Not the Apple Dumpling Gang, but the gang of scamps on Miri. All right, so some thoughts. And my overriding note is if you, depending on how you felt about the films Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome and Steven Spielberg's Hook, depends on how a modern audience might accept this idea of children running amok and causing headaches for the grown-ups. If you liked either of those prior pictures, then you probably had no trouble at all with all of their, pranks and so
Shenanigans.
forth. Shenanigans.
I got to jump on that because elder millennial here loved Hook growing up. As a matter of fact, I still have my original VHS, which I watched so many times. The cellulose no longer holds the film. It's all static now. I have several other copies of the film, including VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, and so forth. However, I loved it. I loved Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. And I remember as a very young UrzaMaster, I think I was 3 or maybe 4, seeing Miri on, obviously, TV in syndication at far too late an hour for me to be awake. Oh gosh, it was probably after like The Outer Limits or something on a Saturday night, when just before the color bars came on. Dating myself, y'all probably remember those, but I'm sure some of our millions
And
millions.
and millions of viewers are like, color bars, the hell are you talking about? Well, the station sign-offs ended shortly after 1990, but I will say that Miri took me right back to Hook and everything I loved about like the idea of kids being empowered and in charge and the utter chaos, right? The utter chaos that would ensue. And it's still funny to me that the subtext, which completely was lost on me as a child, but as an adult now, the subtext is quite clear that chaos will only continue unless there is a presence of an adult to right the ship. Even in Hook, where Robin Williams has to rediscover his inner child, he's still the adult in the room who has to right the ship. And as I grow older, I more and more agree with Dustin Hoffman in that movie. Like, just let Hook win. So, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
Oh
off, but I
no,
had to
no,
bring
no,
that
no.
up because it's a
Fantastic,
fantastic tie-in.
indeed. Some notes on this episode that struck out at me. We have another "He's Dead" from Bones in this one. I liked the prominent no smoking sign in the lab. It's nice to know that even intergalactic, even in the mid '60s, where everyone was smoking like a chimney, there was still some regard for good air quality and so forth. I still love '60s computers where you just press a button and it makes noises and then delivers any information that you need that will further advance the plot or so forth. It was just
How convenient.
it was awesome. The we'll talk about Kirk and the young girl shortly, but Miri. But my first thing is just an aesthetic, and I get your guys' quick opinion on this one. I believe that the best phaser model that we've ever seen in terms of how it's held in the hand, its power settings, what it's able to do, its sheer coolness factor, is Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Whether we're frying earworms or zapping traitorous Reliant crew members, so on and so forth, go back and look at that sleek, very simple design for the phaser, and I believe that that's truly best in class. But the phaser has undergone revisions, whether in the Next Generation and the Rick Berman series or the original show or even the films. It would jump, and basically they would settle on two sorts of designs: more of a ray gun, handgun kind of feel, with in the original series, very long barrel and the little radar dish on the end of it, or the remote control version, which I kind of first caught glimpse of because remember I hadn't seen all the original episodes. Sulu takes out some of Starfleet Command's things basically by pointing a car fob at it and zapping it, and I felt very underwhelmed when I saw that because again I had just come off of Star Trek II where they had the best looking laser guns in the business. So I ask you, gentlemen, and in this episode we have both. We have the remote control, as favored by Kirk, I believe, and then we have other members of the away team and Spock and so forth holding the more traditional gun model. So I ask you, what's your favorite phaser design? Not so much even where it was, but just do you prefer the classic pistol? Or do you prefer the much more sort of less threatening looking remote control version?
Ooh, this is a great question because I could answer this several different ways because I'm in love with Star Trek. And it's one of the things that, honestly, I don't think it's talked about enough is the weaponry of Star Trek because it's supposed to be a show focused on diplomacy and peace and utopia, right? But I am very partial, and this is my own bias, I guess, but I'm very partial to the phaser rifles that we see in Star Trek Generations, or excuse me, First Contact, where they fight the Borg on the dish in space. I thought those are the coolest. Like, I think we'd seen phaser rifles before that, and of course in DS9 and Next Generation and Voyager, there were several iterations of the various phaser rifles. They weren't really as fun. But I think that was the one I really liked the most. Certainly growing up, I have an appreciation for the little key fob ones in the original series. I always thought that was kind of clever. Like, it seemed like a peacekeeping weapon of the future. Like, it's very much muted. It's not a phallic symbol, which I think often weaponry is. You think of a torpedo or, even a phaser, from the ship kind of thing is kind of a phallic symbol in a way that, it always seemed like this extension of real human war, which, I know, of course it is, but I thought that was kind of a unique commentary just on the development of weaponry. It's always been kind of a drawing of swords contest, if you will, if you take my metaphor meaning there. And I think, the key fob version kind of removes the patriarchy from it, and that to me is kind of neat. I don't know that was ever intentional, but I think that was kind of cool. So if I have to judge original series weaponry, it's the key fob for me.
Now I'm looking. I'll tell you the one I couldn't stand first. Because I was watching DS9 on Pluto TV the other day, and basically for their phaser rifles, all they did was put like a long stock on a regular phaser, and that was a phaser rifle. So I thought that was kind of cheesy. That's just me. But looking here, I kind of gotta go with Mr. Hatcher. That Star Trek II like design it's very sleek. Yeah, I kind of think that's what I would go with. I remember seeing for the first time in Next Gen when they used one of those phasers, and that just, I don't know why, but it blew my mind, because I always felt it should look like a gun like we would have, right? Where it would have a handle to it and things like that. But I remember being kind of in awe of that design for Next Gen. But yeah, I'd have to, I think you're both right on point there. That might be a 1A, 1B for me. That Wrath of Khan phaser, and then the phaser rifles from First Contact.
And
yeah,
the
those are
direct
definitely
TV
good.
remotes for everything else there. So
Right.
okay, so of course the major sort of emotional threads or beats of this is how is Kirk going to win these kids over before they die off from this terrible plague. And in doing so, he has to manipulate the attentions and affections of young Miri. And so, again, from a narrative standpoint, even from an emotional standpoint, it tracks, and you get it. And obviously, we are looking back as we are in the 1960s from our comfortable perch here in 2023. But all the same, all that being said, and maybe it's just the slight sheen of sweat as captured by a William Shatner who's clearly been infected by the mysterious ailment. I don't want to say it crosses the line into creepy, but you can definitely read a lot into it from a more modern perspective, as you did now, just in terms of how comfortable it is in basically playing that off. And it's fascinating to watch Yeoman Rand. I mean, and they're not even hiding it. The younger woman, older woman, no, he's mine. I saw him first. Look at my legs. That Grace Lee Whitney. I mean, watching these shows, in order, close together. I mean, this is a subplot that just isn't going away. They're like, we got to get Rand in there. She's got to be flirty with Kirk in some fashion, and she doesn't get quite nearly the ugly scales and bruising because that wouldn't have looked as the male viewers of the show would have been like, eh. But so she gets to kind of maintain sort of her earthly beauty while everyone else is starting to turn purple. And the show, I think Lord Uther referenced it upon his reviewing of this a few days ago. The show definitely tries to dial up some of the thespianic qualities, not just for our Canadian ham in the lead, but even the supporting characters, DeForest Kelley and so forth. Only Leonard Nimoy as Spock is immune to tantrums of overacting. So I thought Lord Uther might chime in on that in terms of, I mean, clearly it's meant to drive you mad, but you guys can bounce that around like a pickleball.
Well, yeah, we finally get those long pauses and lots of dramatic acting, right? So we finally get to see some of that beautiful Shatner work that he's so well known for. I did like the anger, and I was actually going to bring this up, so it's a great segue, that McCoy is showing, like, the frustration that he winds up kind of having with Kirk, and then how, yeah, Spock is just kind of sitting there observing everything and trying to be the one that's keeping the peace. But just how they kind of start losing their minds that way, to me it was hilarious. Or like when Kirk gets surrounded by all the kids and he comes stumbling out and he's bleeding because these kids were whooping on him. I don't. It's just it was a good episode, but just some really goofy parts to it. I was wondering where Uhura was at. I thought that was
Yes,
kind of interesting.
Pharaoh was at
That there
comp.
was,
Yeah, creepy Pharaoh.
yeah, so there was a different person on communications. So I thought that was
It
again
was a spa
something a
day
little different.
for Uhura. She's like,
Right? Yeah, maybe it was.
so,
But yeah, that we got to kind of see some of a little bit of the origins there of that wonderful Shatnerus that we have come to love over time.
I I really enjoyed the overacting, but I think my nostalgia for that is a little overshadowed by my modern viewing of kind of like you said the borderline creepy love story that gets woven in here. However, I feel like through the madness of it all, and this is after multiple viewings, because it always felt a little to me, but now I kind of see this sort of undertow of Kirk really realizing that the age gap is an issue, right? And it's very like almost subtle. Like he has a control somewhere in the madness where he's like, look, obviously, this young of a girl, this old of a man, that's not okay. Even though I think age gaps back in the 60s probably weren't as, shall we say, pronounced necessarily. It wasn't so far out of the realm, you know. I mean, even into the 80s, she's only 17, major radio hit. You know, we've got, you know, some definite kind of creepiness through a modern lens, but I think there was a thread, and maybe me hoping more so than actually being there, but I think there was a thread of Kirk realizing that he needed to use this to his advantage because of the heat of the moment situation and the urgency with which they needed to act, rather than this is the madness, I'm being compelled by something. So I always thought that was kind of interesting.
and to pick up on that, if you'll bear with me for a second, I wasn't even so much creeped out by the idea that it would be a physical thing, but just the idea, and he is encouraged by the other crew members to kind of like, hey, you know, you may have to use this. It was just the idea that emotionally he was okay with manipulating her, her obvious feelings for him, and like that was the best path forward. Was, I mean, it was just sort of an adult realizing, hey, you know, this girl's into me and I can get her to do what I need her to do. And I'm just, so it was more of like sort of the emotional subtext there. I mean, I never thought like, hey, how about afterwards we, you know, get some Romulan ale and go back to my cabin, but just more the idea that he's okay with taking, even though, you know, they're aging slowly and she's obviously, you know, much older than her appearance, the idea that he would be willing to do that to basically a child, I guess, was just, it just has some interesting, yeah.
I think the the subtext there is that it's the adult in the room making the best decision for the group, right?
Right.
Because even though she's clearly much older than she appears, she's still a child in her mind, right? She still thinks like a child, and he's the adult who realizes that she's not cogent enough to realize that, you know, you have to put your big person pants on and make the hard decisions. And sometimes I think as parents, we do have to lean into sort of the manipulation of our children a little bit to get them to do the right thing,
Right.
or to do what they need to do. And sometimes it takes, not to this level necessarily, but sometimes it takes a little emotional manipulation. That could be promise of a toy or promise of a treat. It's the same idea, it's just magnified, and I think it comes off creepier than maybe it was ever intended to be.
Right.
And again, I think that might be the modern lens talking, where it's like, ooh, this is icky, emotional, you know, pseudosexual manipulation. It's like, it's really not. It's dangling the treat in front of the child, saying, if you clean up your room, you know, you can have this candy, and you know they do it. I mean, I think, again.
Okay. Yeah.
I think there's other things going on there, but I think sometimes we get a little colored by you know, a modern lens where we're thinking a little too too far into, I don't want to say too far into the feminist side of things, because I don't think that's quite accurate, but I think we're thinking a little too far into the El Creepo kind of side of things. I think this is more like he's an adult, he needs to make the adult decision, and it's going to take some toughness that I think, only an adult can have over a child, doing the right thing that doesn't feel right because it's going to inflict some kind of a harm on them. It's like having them get their shots at the doctor, and lying to them, oh, there's no shots today, you don't have to worry about it. Oh, it's not going to hurt. That's emotional manipulation. I mean, it's traumatic, but it's a necessary trauma in a way. And I feel like that's kind of the commentary, at least I hope they were going for here, because I think it's traumatic for Kirk too. And then that's something that doesn't translate, I think, in, let's say, the text or the context of the episode. I think Kirk is, despite all of this, really struggling. And I think that's part of the overacting kind of overshadows this. But to me, it kind of played out a bit on his facial expressions, which, again, having viewed this episode, I don't know, umpteen million times at this point, like, now I'm sort of just digging for things that maybe aren't even there. But I think one of the unique things that we've seen with like a Star Trek Picard Season 3 is how much is told on the actor's face. And I've always thought that Star Trek does this very well, where maybe certain other shows we talk on certain other podcasts doesn't quite get there because somebody's wearing a big bucket on their head, is, what's being told on the face. Now, shout out to Kenobi, because I think Ewan McGregor does a ridiculously good job of this. But for all of Shatner's goofy overacting, I think you see the struggle play out on his face here, where he's like, I don't want to do this, and that's I think where the bigness comes from in his sort of playing up in his character, is like he's really trying to convey these complexities that, to be frank, on a small screen don't come through. I think on the big screen movies we see a lot more of that, particularly when he's dealing with the death of his son David. You see the emotion cross his brow, and you just, I think he said in interviews before, the reason he played Kirk the way he played him is on the small screen you don't have the benefit of a stage or of a 20-foot screen where you can make these complexities and emotions come through so easily with just regular acting. You have to be bigger than what's going on the picture. And I for all of the cheesiness of it or the hate it may get, I honestly think William Shatner does not get the credit he deserves in some way. And that might sound crazy, because for a 90-year-old man, he gets praised at every turn. But what he's got playing on in some of these episodes in this first season, with a hodgepodge of writers, a hodgepodge of directors, and no real consistency, catchphrase, I think that, it's just amazing that he does what he does. And that's something that, I'm sure other people have praised him for this. I can't be breaking new ground here. But I'm going to say that this melodramatic actor is actually doing us all a favor by giving us these dynamic performances that have lasted generations for this reason, is that we're still finding things. Side note, can you imagine being like, maybe in your mid-50s in 2001, when the BBC finally allows these episodes to air, and you're seeing Miri for the first time? New Star Trek from 1966 in 2001, the fangirl in me is just bubbling over. I mean, it's crazy to think that somebody might be seeing this with fresh eyes in 2001 going, oh my god, new Star Trek episode. I bet they did millions of viewers on these episodes when they re-aired, because this, especially this one, it's timeless, right? I mean, we've seen it played out time and time again in movies and in TV, this exact storyline. As a matter of fact, I think, did DS9 like basically just recon this episode in one of their I think it was DS9 or something, where it was a bunch of kids and there was something, I don't know, I swear there was another Star Trek series that did virtually the same episode. Maybe it was Next Generation, where they all became kids again. Guinan, and yeah, I mean, it just you could retell this story in 1,000 ways. It still works. It's still compelling. It's still entertaining. And Grace Lee Whitney, I have to say, just timeless performance. Like, again, she's put in that kind of male-focused role where it's like, okay, we need you to go be pretty, but she absolutely nails it to the point where it's like you've transcended just the male gaze of the show and become like a fine actor. You know, you've really communicated a character who is going through something and sort of is this, shall we say, symbol of affection, but really delivers a performance that goes beyond just eye candy. And that does not get talked about enough, I think. I think Star Trek does a really nice job of elevating even the most tertiary female characters that are just sort of supposed to be in the background, even if they're foreground characters, and makes them something better. And for the 60s, that's truly groundbreaking.
Yes.
Catchphrase.
I can't follow that. Yes.
Okay. All right, then. Well, we will turn the page on Miri and head to episode 9, Dagger of the Mind, which first aired on November 3rd, 1966. As we previously teased you, Vincent McEvedy directed this episode as well. The writer is credited as S. Barr David. That's actually a pen name for Shimon Winselberg, whose TV credits, in addition to Dagger of the Mind, included Rawhide, Route 66, The Wild Wild West, The Lloyd Bridges Show, and I would like to go back and find episodes of The Lloyd Bridges Show, Trapper John M.D., and Dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
So,
What credits are those? Fantastic.
The actors and actresses who populated this, we had as the scheming Dr. Adams, James Gregory with a rich velvety voice. He also made a memorable appearance in John Frankenheimer's The Manchurian Candidate. And he was a reoccurring character for several seasons on TV's Barney Miller.
Oh, yeah, he was.
So there you have it. Morgan Woodward played Dr. Van Gelder, who was trying to flee Tantalus 4. The physical and mental toll of playing Van Gelder at such a high bandwidth apparently took its toll on him, and he needed several weeks to recover following the shooting of this episode because he was so dialed up in sort of a frenzied way. And Mariana Hill, who played Dr. Noel, her most notable credit, besides a long list of television appearances, including Love American Style, she played one of the Corleone cousins' daughters' extended family branch in The Godfather Part 2. So if you can put that on your resume for Mr. Coppola, Mr. De Niro, Mr. Pacino, you've done yourself some good. This episode's title was taken from, of course, the great bard William Shakespeare's Scottish play, Macbeth. And any podcast, ladies and gentlemen, that can name drop both Tango and Cash and Macbeth in the same episode is worthy of subscribing and leaving comments, because clearly we can cover every angle on the pop culture spectrum here, from both very lowbrow to its most elevated form. And if you will permit me, if I may quote from the Bard for the episode title, "Is this a dagger which I see before me, the handle towards my hand? Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. Art thou not fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight? Or art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation, proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain?" And there you go.
Still gives me chills. I love Macbeth.
Indeed. It's one of my favorites. It's dark, it's bloody, it's violent. Lady Macbeth is shorthand for any character who is just as scheming as her male counterpart, partner, spouse, what have you, and is even more ruthless, etc. So yes, if you haven't, in fact, Swedish author Joe Nesbo did a modern update of Macbeth set in 1970s Scotland in the drug trade, and for just sheer audacity, taking again the witches and Banquo and all of them and bringing them into a modern detective context is something that if you are a fan and want to read something really out there, Joe Nesbo's Macbeth is fantastic in just its sheer, we're going to go out on a limb here, managing to convert that tale into something much more recognizable to modern fare, while still retaining the poetry of the classic original. So, in this episode,
And lest we forget, Scotland, PA, which is a fantastic version of Macbeth that not a lot of people have seen. It's truly wonderful. Sorry.
Right. No, not
enough Macbeth.
We introduced the Vulcan mind meld in this episode. We've had nerve pinches, we've had green blood references, and now this is the first episode on camera that we do the mind meld. And the language accompanying it and the process does evolve over time, granted. They were workshopping, but you do get the sense that he can go tiptoeing through the corridors of your consciousness and pull out whatever plot sequences and exposition he needs in order to advance the story. So, all right, so some of these notes. Once again, we have a threat to the Enterprise beamed aboard. I don't even know if you can call it a trope. It's just a great way to kickstart an episode where some external threat, an infected crewman, a double Kirk, a escaped prisoner from a prison facility. It's just a classic, like, boy, we beamed up some more trouble here, so that you note that. Those were the biggest pill containers I've ever seen. That they're, and when the episode begins, I mean, these were, the FDA would have a problem with all of those. I love the name. It's actually Tantalus 5, pardon me. I love the name of the planet. It just sounds like a very intergalactic. We've arrived at Tantalus 5. Dr. Noel and the entire Christmas party storyline just suggests to me that Captain Kirk is an HR nightmare. And I know that some of it is played for comic effect, and we've more than covered the idea that in the 60s it was a different way of looking at relationships. But just don't you remember the Christmas party? And
Mad Men before Mad Men.
And right. Exactly. And Kirk sort of like a little embarrassed, like, oh yeah, I should have called you. Like it's just a wonderful little thing there. I love the term neural neutralizer. Again, it's something that back in the 60s sounded very important and very like we must be on guard that we would never develop a neural neutralizer. And now when we hear it, it sounds like something from a 1960s comic book. But so I always thought that was good. I don't know. I cannot say for certain that this is because don't forget a lot of television back in these days was situational comedies, Andy Griffith shows, Gunsmokes. This could be one of the first times we've seen air ducts big enough for humans to crawl through that later John McClane and any movie or television character can use. Sneakers, Robert Redford. But this might be one of the first instances where it's like, hey, there's air ducts up there. We can get a character from room to room without being seen. So I did like that approach there. I like how Noel turned one of the guards into a friar at the end there. We had another he's dead captain. And then, it just the classic, the quote, brainwashing episode. Which, strap him down and let's wipe his mind. I mean, we saw it in Mandalorian Season 3 on Coruscant with the good doctor. So it's something that's been with us a while. And I'm probably reading too much into this, but I enjoyed the doctor as he was making our hero helpless, kind of in an Adam West Batman kind of way. I enjoyed the fact that his motive simply, he wasn't out to conquer the galaxy per se, and this wasn't going to be something I'm going to, launch millions of units. Like, he just loved the idea of being in total control over everyone in this little universe of his. And if someone gets in the way, an interested bystander like Captain Kirk, then he's going to do that. And the manipulation of his relationship with Noel is, I mean, there's, it's strangely intimate, and he's like, you're going to totally, it's fascinating because she's obviously into Kirk, and then the doctor brainwashes him into thinking everything that happened at the Christmas party and more. And now, when Kirk starts to hey, I love you, she rejects that, right? That's not the way she wanted to fall for Kirk. She didn't want this, even though it's ultimately what her heart probably desired. There was a right way and a wrong way to capture the captain's affections, and I thought that it was. I think there's a lot of. I won't say it's not creepy. It's not Miri creepy, but it's just there's a lot going on under the surface churning here that I think an astute viewer will pull out beyond just get out of my mind kind of there and
What?
go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say I love the moral dilemma that's in place here about should you brainwash someone to make them better almost? I mean, someone that was being detrimental to society, is that the kind of the right? And I know it's a manipulation thing too, but I just kind of saw a little bit deeper into that as to if it's morally or ethically the right thing to do. Therapy versus I'm going to literally reprogram your brain. I think that's a very deep.
And is that a sincere? I mean, I've always used the analogy at sometimes, like, let's say you have someone who's in the throes of an addiction, right? And then they may come out of that addiction, whether it's drugs or alcohol or whatever, gambling, and they may replace that with something else, perhaps a spiritual side. Perhaps they dive into and embrace something less secular and more, inviting and open. But all you've really done is substitute one addiction, perhaps, for another, if you have that personality. And so, is reprogramming the mind, Lord Uther, is that really a sincere form of, behavioral modification? Like, have you really made them a better person? All you've really done is just override the original programming. And like I say, there's something like inherently, I would want rehabilitation to come from within, I guess. I would want them to make a genuine choice to be better, or if we're talking about, say, the criminal element and so forth, but not just with a flick of my wrist, I can make you into who I think you should be. I mean, I don't know. You guys bat that one around. That's an interesting.
What?
Well, I think this is probably your first truly philosophical Star Trek episode. Is how do we remediate our criminals? Then that's a trope for Star Trek. It comes up time and time again. Also, want to point out that this episode lays the absolute foundations for one of the best movies of all time, Total Recall. Would not have it without this. But yeah, it's probably, I don't know, probably Star Trek's first real flirtation with an on-the-nose question about society. How do we rehabilitate the criminal in the future? How do we move society forward? Is it through technological manipulation? And of course, at the time, hypnosis was becoming big, sort of the Eastern philosophies, things like that, where they were offering sometimes snake oil, but sometimes, truly new forms of, mental understanding. That could be effective in this manner. But like you said, is it just transference, or is it true remediation? Is it a conscious effort, or is it, is it an MK Ultra? And I think they probably were addressing MK Ultra without people knowing about MK Ultra, which would be, of course, declassified several decades later. I'm sure Timothy Leary loved this episode. It's really. It's just a funky kind of, if you think of it from a very 60s perspective, right? The mind-altering obsession, shall we say, of the late 60s, early 70s plays out, truly well here, honestly. And I I think philosophical questions aside, it's just a really neat dig into the time and the fascination of the mind.
Real quick on that, is this a pushback? Does Roddenberry's personal vision and philosophy say, oh, the 60s, there's too many kids, dropping out and doing Leary acid and so forth, and so is this a conservative with a small c sort of pushback to the idea that in the 60s, like, we can change your mind, we can reframe your belief system? I'm curious if Star Trek is saying, in effect, this is not, this, we should be more in control of our facilities. I just thought of that as you were sort of mentioning that. I'm just wondering, is this saying, like, that's not so good, folks, chemicals and technology trying to change your brain?
I think it is, and I think it's one of the few times that you can ascribe, sort of a conservative view to Roddenberry's vision. I think he sees the value in it, right? And I think this whole episode, you see the value in what the Good Doctor is trying to achieve, but you see how easily it's corrupted. And this is something that plays out time and time again. I mean, you think of, the encounter at Farpoint, right, where he talks about the 23rd century manipulation of their soldiers with drugs. They've learned to control the mind of their soldiers with drugs, and obviously there's an anti-drug movement. Reagan's war on drug was just playing out on TV there, but there was something to be said about that as kind of not a trope, but a thread of just being cautious of how far we push ourselves through artificial means versus the true endeavor of the human spirit. And I think that's Roddenberry's vision, is that we're evolving, we're making a journey, right? We're not necessarily taking a shortcut. And I think that's the real caution here, is the remediation that they're doing in this episode, the dagger of the mind, if you will. It's the shortcut. It's the means to the end that really does matter. And it's very Macbeth. Macbeth has a future predicted to him and achieves it through a means that quickly asserts the end. And that's where therein lies the problem. Same thing in this episode. They are achieving a quick resolution without thought to the consequence. And the potential harm that this could do. And then that, of course, falls back to everybody's favorite 60s reference, which is essentially Nazism. This is Goebbels' propaganda at its finest, literally erasing your conscious mind and replacing it with whatever we want. Like it or not, that's woven into everything. This is either the Red Scare or the Nazis in Gene Roddenberry's vision of the future. And this plays out, by the way, in Next Generation, DS9, Voyager, even today. I mean, these are not tropes. This is just a very human view of, be careful what you wish for, and don't take the easy way out, because you're going to end up with a very likely possibility of, fascism, honestly.
You guys are way too deep for me today because my head is so congested that I just want to say yes to all that, because I'm trying to keep up with the conversation as I'm coughing and sneezing. Yeah, I do think that it's a good, almost like I think it goes back to kind of what I said before, which lines up with what you just said, UrzaMaster, which now I'm just rambling, but it is the idea of what's better, and is the quick fix worth it? Again, just like reprogramming somebody, it's kind of like when I tell my students, please do this, and they say, okay, and I go, well, do you really want to do it? I mean, like, are you doing it for the right reason, or are you doing it because I'm telling you to do it, and you're not learning from it? So I think there's a difference there, right? I'm doing it because you told me to do it, and I'm going to do it again when you're not looking, versus I'm doing it now, I understand why, and even when you're not looking, I'm going to do the right thing, right? So I think those are two different things, and I think that's the same thing here. If you're going to reprogram someone's mind, is that really addressing the deeper problems that might have gotten that person there, and might get other people there too? Like there's ways that you can learn from, and some people can't change it all, but there's ways that you can learn from the actual therapy versus, okay, now you're better. Are you really? I think that's a piece of it too.
And I just, again, I've had several crushes back in my salad days.
No. No, you
Unrequited,
didn't. I never saw any of them. I never heard any of that. And if any of your crushes are watching us right now, you should definitely click subscribe so you can see this handsome man that you missed out on in high school continue to tell you about all things Star Trek, all things Star Wars. I mean, you name it, this guy can do it.
Where's our
Anyway,
pulsating light to convince people to do this?
yes.
You will
Tell
subscribe.
us more about your high school crushes.
Okay.
Please.
No. My point in bringing all of that sordid history up is that
Yes.
the idea that, again, you can pine from someone from afar and you realize that they're not going to really turn their gaze upon you like the eye of Sauron. But like I say, when you finally get what you want, I think the Rolling Stones told us you can't always get what you want. And I really emphasize this episode. In fact, it's going to bump up at least one warp core from what I originally was going to give this when we grade it momentarily. I just really empathize with her saying, boy, I finally have what I've probably been dreaming about, and yet I don't want this. And I kind of feel pity or shame or disgust at, the affections that are now coming my way. Like, again, we've seen it all time again. Take love potion number 9, and suddenly you swoon.
Love potion number 9.
Exactly. You spill some, and then suddenly you're in love with the cat next door, et cetera, et cetera. Like it's, Lucasfilm's Willow did that without really pushing. Like I say, like this episode of Star Trek, otherwise, when it's been used for other humorous effect or plot points, it feels sad. It just, and again, Kirk eventually snaps out of it, and there's an uneasy detente until, the Halloween party, which is probably coming up for the crew. But this is another example of Star Trek exploring the human condition, and if you open yourself up to it and spot those undercurrents of human psychology and so forth, you can really be rewarded. It's not necessarily something that is, plastered 40-foot high, blinking neon lights. But if you take the time to kind of analyze it and think about it a little bit after the episode ends, you can really come away with some striking commentary on just, again, human interaction, human frailties, human foibles, the matters of the heart. And I think this episode, while talking about everything we've talked about, I think there's a real, there's some scar tissue as she realizes that this man that she kind of had on a pedestal, and wouldn't it be great if, and then finally it's like, here, you can have anything you want. He's in love with you. He'll give up everything for you, and she just kind of rejects that, both subconsciously and consciously, like, no, this is sheer madness. So I really connected with that particular plot thread in this episode, even more so than the criminals with their minds wiped.
It's really a beautiful story and just never ages. Again, classic Trek. And with that, I think we're at a good point to fire up our warp cores and pass our judgments on these two episodes. Again, season 1 of Star Trek, the original series, really, it breaks so much new ground that it's almost hard to not give this a across the board 7 out of 7 warp cores. But as we always do, we will judge these episodes on their individual merits. So I defer today.
Oh, please let me go first.
To Lord Uther.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's get your thoughts.
Well, I know some. Oh, excuse me.
Oh my.
Oh my. I know the episode. There's a lot of great episodes coming up, so I'm going to preface my ratings with that. The first one I was going to give 5 out of 7, but I'm going to give it 5.5 out of 7 now, because anytime, again, you can bring up Tango and Cash, it automatically boosts it up a half a warp core. The next one, I was going to give a 5 out of 7, but that one's going to get a 5.5 out of 7, because anytime I can hear my friend talk about pining for females in high school when he's literally talking about half of our former female class from 1991 that he was pining for. That definitely gets it another half a warp core up to 5.5 out of 7. So for those reasons, I'm going 5.5 on both. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Pine Man himself, Mr. Hatcher.
Well, thank you, Lord Uther. And if you happen to be Lori, Tracy, Michelle, Stacy, Anna,
Angela, Sandra, and Rita.
please add your name to our growing list of subscribers. Maybe you can put in some comments. Did you enjoy that Olive Garden meal that we enjoyed in December of 1989? If yes, go ahead and click that. So, no. So for Miri, for me, I'm kind of in line. I'm going to go with a 5 on this one, and really for one reason, because I had a harder time dividing myself from current John Hatcher than I did from. I would have had I experienced this perhaps at an earlier age as UrzaMaster did. I think that Hook and Thunderdome are terrific pictures, but a little brattiness does go a long way, and the that can easily go from threatening and ominous to would somebody give these kids a timeout? So I'm going to go 5 there, but I've talked myself into a strong 6 for Dagger of the Mind, for those emotional threads that we were talking about, for its philosophical examination of these questions, and for the possibility that in its own subtle way, there was a social critique going on during the time period that this episode was airing and shot. That, again, doesn't bludgeon you over the head. It wasn't, drugs are bad! I mean, it wasn't one of those. They weren't like beating on hippies, at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago in '68. But in its own small way, it was kind of like a little, hey, there's better ways than what you're currently employing. And so for that, I like I say, I spot it. Maybe it's there. Maybe Roddenberry had just taken some bad acid and was like, well, never again. But I feel like that this is definitely something that you can kind of spot, and we'll see if it perks up in any future episodes down the road. So we'll go 5'6", which is an ideal height for a point guard. Not bad.
Little insight there into the sports world. If you haven't subscribed, you should, because Cut the Cheese, Poke the Bear tackles the sports world. Myself and Lord Uther. My ratings, I of course am ever the optimist and the lover of Star Trek. It's kind of hard to recolor my enamored 5-year-old self that saw these for the first time or younger. I love going back and rewatching these episodes because some of these, Miri for one, always creeped me out. And then I think when I was in my 20s, I was a little more annoyed with the children because I famously don't care for child actors. But now in my 30s, about to be mid-30s, I've developed a much, much deeper appreciation for this episode. I'm going to go with a 6 out of 7. And I get to the very fine acting of William Shatner as sort of where I hang my hat on this one. I think this is way better than it's ever been given credit for, and I tip my hat to Shatner playing up the role of I need to be the adult despite the fact that I'm slowly losing my mind. I think that is a decision that, while it plays out a little bit perhaps creepy in this episode, I think that kind of idea, which is echoed throughout the annals of time ever since, despite the fact that you're slowly, let's say, going crazy, you still have these moments of cognition where you have to elevate yourself. You have to step into the role of captain. You have to take charge. And that's something that, is really poignant. And I don't know that it was ever intentional. I think this is definitely some well, we all bring our own context to the context, right? But for me, it's the beauty of Star Trek made manifest. So I have high praise for Miri. Dagger of the Mind is a 7 out of 7 warp cores for me. It was always going to be that way. This episode, like a few before it and a few that will precede it. What can I say that I haven't already said? Everything about this episode I love. I think it is the one unique conservative experience, or one of a few perhaps, that really has solid, foundational commentary. And I think that's something, frankly, we've lost in society today, is to be reminded a bit that we do need to slow down sometimes. And we do need to realize that the easy way out, or the Google way out, is not always the best solution. Sometimes you have to show your work. As much as I hated it in school, as much as I thought, well, we're going to have calculators, sometimes you need to know how the formula works. And Mr. Schmidt, if you're watching, which I know you are, my physics teacher from high school, since we're talking high school today, I have never learned more hard lessons with a 70% C final grade in a class than I did in physics in high school. I learned so much that I won a Nintendo GameCube at Six Flags Great America because I figured out how an arcade game worked by doing a formula for constant velocity. And boy, I tell you what, 50 cents bought me a GameCube that day because it was a physics problem. And this speaks to that understanding that you have to develop to achieve. And all right, here comes my volley, my Hail Mary. This is the American dream played out in an episode of Star Trek. It is the work hard and achieve. It is not the quick get rich that we see in the 80s. And it is certainly not the let's find the easiest way to get something done that you saw in the late 50s, the boomer age, post-war, we want instant gratification, we want TV dinners. No, sometimes you have to slave over that hot stove for that meal that you really want. And I'm sorry, but the amazing message of this episode, which plays out in so many different arenas, for me, is chef's kiss. I love it. I will watch this episode over and over for the rest of time, as should you. And believe me, time's arrow, ding, 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 is important. Don't forget it. With that, this is the 33rd episode of the Warp Core Podcast.
Larry Bird podcast.
The Larry Bird episode of the Warp Core Podcast. And I know Larry's watching. Thank you, Larry, for subscribing. And thanks to all our subscribers, by the way. We value you very, very much. We are planning to do more live broadcasts, including the Warp Core Podcast and our other shows here at Pending Rebrand. So do yourself a favor. If you haven't already, which you probably have, but if you haven't, for whatever reason, hit that subscribe button. Give us a like if you like the episode, or drop us a comment, or both. Tell us what you thought. Tell us, are we reaching a little too far? Are we digging a little too deep? Or are we digging just deep enough? Or is there something we missed? We are always wanting to hear from you guys and gals and in-betweens and everything outside of the spectrum, because as Roddenberry's future predicts, it's a wonderful myriad of strange new worlds, new civilizations, new life forms, and we will boldly go, where no warp core has gone before. Live long and prosper.